Welcome, pharma marketers, to our next episode of Thoughts from the Greenhouse. This episode is very specific, but super helpful, especially for the clinical stage biotechs and the early stage pharma marketers out there. And where we're going to focus today is specifically on HCP media planning for that clinical stage, and specifically for an unbranded campaign. So we'll actually have two podcasts in this series, one about media planning for unbranded campaign, and the follow-up will be media planning for a branded campaign, sort of the launching of the brand. So the two work hand in hand. So they're definitely going to be worthy of two different podcasts. And for expertise and knowledge on media planning, we've brought two special guests here today, Walt and Nicole, and I'll let them introduce yourselves. Walt, how about you?
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me on, Todd, and always good to see you. I am Walt Steenburgen, and I'm the SVP of Healthcare here at Media Space Health. 20 plus years in the pharma space, and a lot of experience with media, especially the pre-launch stuff. And we'll be talking a lot about DSE today, which is disease state education, and really looking forward to having this conversation.
Thank you, Walt. And something that really stuck out, Walt's a little too humble to say it maybe, but what stuck out getting to know Walt is his personal connection, his passion about this industry and his family. He has, a rare disease that he's been working on, and he's worked on policies and getting different policies approved and advocacy. So this industry is very near and dear to his heart. So thank you, Walt, for your passion, for helping out patients and HCPs, and for your advice here today on our podcast. Nicole.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for having us. My name is Nicole Urzendowski, Healthcare Media Supervisor at Media Space Health, with 7-8 years in the media industry, 4 years specializing in pharma, really with a focus in rare disease, oncology, diagnostics, and therapeutics. So really boots on the ground in that media planning element and connecting data-driven insights. So looking forward to this conversation and our next one as well.
Thank you, Nicole. And BCG has been working with Nicole and Walt for coming on a couple years now across branded and unbranded campaigns for HCPs. And we've seen firsthand how some of the decisions they've made, the recommendations they've made to clients, have really improved results and had major effects on the campaigns that we work on. So they were on our the top of our very short list to bring onto a podcast that we think will really be helpful to the pharma and biotech marketers out there. So let's start with a simple question on timing and when, because BCG is worked with you and sometimes not with you, but on different unbranded campaigns and with different clinical stage biotech and pharma companies. And one thing that tends to stick out to me that's very inconsistent across these different clients is when they bring in media planning as a discipline, when they think it's imperative that they start really thinking about very strategic buys, cross-matching MPI lists, etc. Different clients think about it in different ways. So from your experience, Walt, working for over 20 years with these clinical stage companies, when have you seen the best results for these biotech companies to start bringing in the media planning discipline?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, the interesting part about the biotech space, of course, is it's very exciting, it's very dynamic, and there's lots going on. And especially as, people have raised money and they're starting to go through the clinical trials, and they're very, very focused, which is absolutely appropriate, on those clinical trial results, right? How are we doing phase 1, phase 2, phase 3? And especially with the smaller biotech, they kind of tend to neglect the fact that, like, oh, geez, we're now like 6 months away from PDUFA, and what are we going to do with all of this wonderful clinical information that we have? So, we like to work with, partners like you guys who are very forward thinking. And quite honestly, even if you're not going to do the actual media planning and launch the media, we think it is as soon as you can start looking at what the media channels might be, what the landscape looks like, what particular MOA is in your biotech, and there's so many things to consider. The HCP audience, which we find with a lot, especially when it's their first product, a lot of biotechs, they don't really understand how difficult it is to break through and reach the HCP audience in such a way that even on the DSE side of things, and especially in rare disease, which we do a lot of, they may not even be aware that this condition is out there. HCPs are bombarded with tons of different information. They do their best to try to stay up to date, attending congresses and so forth. But if you are talking about, we're working on a campaign right now where the patient population is 1 in a million. So we are talking about 365 patients in the United States. And we are going to be working on educating these HCPs well before launch so that at least as they're getting to the commercialization stage where the sales reps are actually going out there, they actually will have some understanding of this particular disease and what our treatment options, standard of care, are there any, for example, and working through so that they are prepared to actually make a dent.
So if we're looking at the different stages, I mean, a lot of times clients will come to us and they're probably 2 years out from a branded launch. And so there's constantly sort of that question on, okay, when do you want to launch, especially for HCPs, when do you want to launch this unbranded campaign? And so there's obviously the chronology of you sort of before you have media, you need the creative, you need the positioning and the messaging for that media. So I think there's a clear chronology to, we need messaging, positioning, creative, and then we launch the media. But where specifically in that realm, in that process, do you think media planning can kind of help inform creative and some decisions and which channels it'll be on, versus looking, rather than looking at it like what stage and how early, maybe, kind of what's the latest possible? Because I do think, a lot of times you have these small biotechs and they're using sometimes a hodgepodge of marketers, right? They have some freelancers, some part-timers, some full-timers, and so they're overwhelmed. They have a small staff, they have a lot going on. So I think a lot of times they look at media and they're like, oh, that's another thing I need to juggle and I don't necessarily need it yet. So where do you think and when do you think could be sort of that last possible moment? I know there's best case scenarios that everyone's involved from day one, but when in that sort of creative campaign production process, you feel like would really be the last stop before media planning is brought on?
So I would say, just very generalized, right? And this is outside of pediatric review and, orphan disease, which has an accelerated timeline, right, for launch, which is a whole other, timeline. But if you are, sort of standard launch, really phase 3 and 6 months before your expected PDUFA rate would really, in our minds, be the absolute last minute that you should be doing this. And some of this depends on the specialty that you're trying to reach as well, right? So if you're trying to reach oncologists, these guys, it is one of the most hotly contested spaces. Everybody wants to reach the oncologists, and you're also going against companies like Novartis and these, humongous companies that are just dumping money in there to make sure that their messages are being heard. So in that case, especially with the smaller budgets, which we're very good at working at, and I say we, I mean Nicole, when we are doing that, we really like to be in before that, if possible. But I would say if you have to pick a time frame, 6 months minimum to get your DSC out there to start educating the HCPs.
Great. Yeah, I know we have a cliche we say all the time, like every question in marketing begins with "it depends." So I like that you put all the caveats out there, and it's hard to get really very binary and specific direct answers to any questions specifically, but thank you for boiling that down for us. And so, what sort of prioritizations and what sort of contemplations and major decisions do you think these early stage marketers need to be thinking about when it comes to media?
So there's a lot of considerations to take in there, right? Number one is current landscape, right? So identifying the specialties that you're going after. And in some cases, you actually have to, there is a diagnosis journey that you have to consider. Like it might be a PCP who first sees this patient, then he refers to, this is an actual case study, then they refer to a dermatologist who then refers to an oncologist, right? So DSE figures all in there. It's like if a patient just shows up at the PCP with a specific rash, there are some rare types of cancer that do just appear like an irritation on the skin, but it could be Sézary syndrome, to pick a particular condition that we've worked with. And so you need to consider that diagnosis journey. You need to consider, okay, as you're trying to reach these specialties, how do you do that? And for example, if you are trying to reach the PCP audience, and these days that also includes NPs and PAs, you're talking hundreds of thousands of potential caregivers who are going to be seeing these patients. And so then you have to consider, well, let's look at the scope of this. And are there geographic things that we need to be focusing on? Are there centers of excellence? Are there congresses, conferences that would really address this specific disease or condition that we really want to get in front of the HCPs for? You also want to consider whether or not this is a first in class. Is it an MO, brand new MOA? Nobody's heard of this before, because that is a different DSE campaign as well, with how the media is going to roll out there. It is, is this a first line, second line, third line therapy, right? So there's a lot of different things to consider before you even get into, hey, here's, the money that you need, and here's how we're going to pull the trigger to actually help educate the HCPs who are going to be writing for your products.
Yeah. I mean, every discipline has its strategy and its planning processes and the inputs that go into the upfront thinking. You just have to do a little bit of thinking before you really start deciding. And I like how you brought up DSE, DSA. I mean, those two acronyms, we hear a lot of clients, and even sometimes internally, we fall into the world of combining them in many ways. And there's a lot of similarities, but when you think of the A as awareness and the E as education, those are two really important decisions. I think a lot of the points that you talked on there is like, look, we need to educate HCPs on something that's pretty new, or do we need to just sort of raise awareness of this sort of new treatment paradigm that may be coming out? There's so many different ways to slice and dice that. And I think that's a nice segue, I think, Nicole, in thinking through like DSA, DSE, like just from a media perspective. How does awareness versus education and just the overall unbranded HCP targeting, how do you think through all of that, and kind of what's the role of media planning in helping those campaigns come to life?
Yeah, great question, Todd. And, building off of all that Walt said, this unbranded effort is kind of an uphill battle for many manufacturers when they're trying to really get in and get in front of the eyes of these key HCPs. So we see these unbranded DSE, DSA campaigns as a vital foundation to really set the stage for your branded launch down the line and almost create a halo effect to really capture the eyes and attention of your specialties. We've seen through a lot of research and years of campaign planning and activation that HCPs really rely on a trust and understanding of a product and the disease state itself before they'll even consider discussions with their patients, and then let alone writing the script. So really using DSE, DSA, some awareness, some education, they kind of complement each other down the line, but it creates that scientific legitimacy, credibility, and ultimately just paving the way for adoption down the line. Looking at DSE, it's kind of taking it that step further and providing that education that HCPs may need. To Walt's point, a different MOA, first line, second line. There's so many options, so many caveats that we can make. Whereas, a DSA campaign, you're really just looking to get eyes on the messaging and connect with HCPs when and where it matters most.
Yeah, I like that phrase, the halo effect. I mean, all the decisions, I won't say all, most of the decisions you make during an unbranded campaign have to be fully informed by the branded launch and the knowledge of the branded launch and when that's coming and how you'll be positioned. And you just need this sort of frozen rope of consistency and how the brand itself can pay off what you're setting up in the DSE or DSA campaigns. And I think you brought up an important point about trust. I mean, most of these unbranded campaigns have the company name attached to it. So something we might have probably should have brought up earlier is that in these discussion points, we are assuming that if you're a clinical stage, early stage company, that you have your company branding, your company positioning, your company website, you have all of that locked and loaded. You're confident with how you're positioning your company itself, because your company will, once again, that halo effect comes from corporate to unbranded all the way through branded. You need that halo effect that goes over all three. And so you need to really, especially if your company is early stage and new to these HCPs, there needs to be this sort of corporate foundation of trust even before you start getting into the unbranded work. So now we can get down to, I think, a little the nitty gritty and really what it all boils down to. I mean, Walt, you talked a lot about some of the different pieces of information that affect decision making, but really when it comes down to making the decision, it comes down to how much money do I spend and where do I spend it when it comes to media, right? And so what channels have you seen or been worth spending the money in unbranded campaigns?
Yeah, it is a total bear that a media planner takes on. It depends on the budget, the timing, all of that. But really, when we look at a DSA campaign, first and foremost, we're looking for those evergreen, always on tactics. Think your paid search, your programmatic, key medical journals, where you can be broad reaching against an entire disease state or specialty, or getting even deeper. You think your radiation oncologist, your pulmonologist, whatever it may be, hemonc, to really dive in. But then we'd also look to supplement during key time periods with, important emails, getting in those key announcements, updating on clinical trial data, whatever it may be. But also, jumping into conferences, building that trust early and being in front of HCPs at those key moments where you're able to truly connect versus just place your branded messaging in front of them on a screen where they may or might not connect with it. And then even taking it a step further with KOL engagement, professional social is a great option too that can really make an impact. So there's plenty of tactics down the line that we can work with clients on.
From our experience, I think what we've seen is that these early stage biotechs, their head is all about that seasonality that you mentioned. It's about the congresses and the conferences. They tend to look at those as places where they announce data, and that's kind of where the medical and the promotional and the communications, investor relations, public relations, marketing, all medical communication, like they all sort of merge and coalesce on these moments of these conferences. And so I have seen a pattern of these organizations focusing on those conferences. And then it's like, okay, so this conference is in November. What do we do in November? What do we do specifically at the conference or to surround the conference, some of that surround sound? So would you mind zooming in on that a little bit? Like when you see that and notice and work with a client that identifies a specific conference that's of significant importance to them. Maybe they even already have committed to a poster presentation, let's say, and maybe even a booth. What channels and what sort of surround sound, of course, always depending on budget, would you recommend? Maybe you can kind of think about it in tiers, like, so what are some of the most important priorities around the conference? And then if you had additional budget, how could you expand it out?
Yeah, there are a plethora of opportunities you could look at for conferences, whether you're looking at, the big big one on the street of ASCO down to, a small 100, 300 person conference. So we like to look at it as, in the conference walls, like you said, supplementing the booth, getting even just some video assets, speaking to the disease state, speaking to the corporate branding itself, that HCPs can scan a QR code, get the activity on the back end, and see where HCPs are engaging, get different paneling, or different floor stickers is something that always seems to come up among HCPs, elevator clings, things to just really make your presence known throughout the conference walls. But then there's also the ability to, dig into the deep sponsorships where it's more of a package. It's doing the poster presentations, doing a networking reception, whatever it may be. So we're here to help in the conference walls. Outside of the conference walls, there's digital out of home, there's third party, endemic platforms and well-respected names in the industry that recap the conferences. They provide, key opinion leaders to have videos made on site and to really interview based on the sessions that are being presented. And then we can also align with the association itself for display banners on site pre, during, post-conference, email updates. There's geofencing. So there's so much inside and outside of the conference walls that we can help with. So it doesn't really matter if your budget is big or small, you can find a way to make an impact at a conference.
That's so true. I think I've seen over the years, it felt like the third party publications started off years ago being great at like providing all the summaries and the emails, and had a lot of paid and even earned opportunities around these conferences. And I think the conference associations themselves over the years have gotten better at doing that themselves too, and providing. So I mean, it's almost like you become a victim of choice. Some of these clients of, there's 3 or 4 different publishers. There's actually the organization itself. There's also the fact that with a lot of these conferences, the big guys have first right of refusal. So you sometimes have to act really early, or you have to just deal with the leftovers. And then a lot of times, I like how you mentioned those packages. Those packages will include a lot of these surround sound initiatives. So a lot of times those packages look expensive, but then when you start saying, okay, I'm just going to exhibit and I'm just going to buy this ad and this email, you're like, oh wow, if I get the package, would have gotten a better deal. So I think these organizations have gotten good at pricing those out in an enticing way also, for sure. Well, you mentioned it a little earlier, and I kind of bookmarked it, Walt, but you hinted towards like there's these large audiences, and then so we talk about these conferences. You're basically reaching a lot of these conferences, all the specialists. But there's also segments, right? There's also whether they be geographical or whether they be sliced and diced through other sort of third-party data or first-party data. But how have you two seen, and I guess either one of you can answer this, but how have you two seen how segmentation has really helped or hurt? Sometimes you might go overboard, but just talk us through how segmentation is used in media planning for an unbranded campaign.
Sure, I can jump in, and Nicole, please, add all of your, very well thought out color after it. But the segmentation, I mean, is super important depending on what you're doing. Now, for example, you could say that one of the products that we're actually working on pre-launch for right now is an oncology product. So you could say, oh, we need to reach all oncologists about this particular product. But in reality, the decisions for who's going to prescribe this are a subspecialty, right? So it's going to be radiation oncologists, and it's going to be nuclear medicine people. And so you don't necessarily want to hit the unless you have the budget, you don't necessarily want to hit a hemoncologist whose specialty is leukemia, because they are, focused on different types of cancer, even though they're all under the oncology umbrella. You have to really dive down into looking at which people are actually going to be seen by the reps, but be also most engaged with this particular audience. And in a lot of cases, we are lucky and we have an NPI list that helps us identify those target HCPs, which is always a fantastic starting point. We often will use that, and this is really, Nicole's forte, is taking a base NPI list and then creating a lookalike audience of other HCPs in the similar specialties that we could branch out to. But if you don't have the NPI list, then again, that's where the media planning comes in, and where, Nicole and team really shine, in my opinion, which is like, yes, let's dive in there and let's get these people at the right moments when they are considering. And again, we're still talking about DSE, right? So, little aside on that. So DSE, I think overall, it's got some advantages and it's got some disadvantages, right? Because it's unbranded. You don't have to do all the ISI information that goes along with it, and all the PI and like rolling banners and all this other stuff. So there's the opportunity to present this particular, just educating. Again, it's just a strict education, to your point about having that corporate branding at the bottom. But, then when you switch over, and we'll get into branded later on, you have more of an opportunity to actually talk about what the particular drug does and how it interacts and what the data is, right? You really can't talk about any of that in the DSE end of things. So it is really the educational piece rather than, just the promotional piece for it.
Yeah, I mean, on
Nicole,
the strategy
please.
and creative side, I've seen this, so many like marketers and clients and creatives just having to deal with these ISIs and yeah, when you get an unbranded campaign, a lot of times it's refreshing. We got all this space to work
Space.
with.
Yes. Yeah. And I'd say too, building off of Walt's point, whether you have an MPI list or not, there's still great opportunities to segment and really dive into the data. We can work with you to develop segments for different targeting strategies based on diagnostic codes, MPT, ICD-10, whatever it may be, to really hone in on that specific audience strategy so that you have that success story. But, obviously the gold standard is to have that MPI list, and we can really create some synergies across, starting off with your unbranded campaign and moving forward into the branded stage, where we can really develop and understand, analyze, dig into the data, and find and understand where HCPs are truly interacting and which of those HCPs are interacting. Because to your point, Walt, there's so many, cooks in the kitchen almost when it comes to the diagnostic journey of understanding, hey, a PCP might still interact because they know that patient is going to come across their desk at some point and it needs to be a referral. So there's so many ways to slice and dice it, as you said earlier, Todd.
Well, I know, Nicole, working firsthand with you, that whether a client, like you said, whether a client has the MPI lists or not, a lot of them do, and they're definitely willing to invest in it. But at the same time, some of these media channels themselves are able to provide that service as part of the buy, right? Can you talk about some of the different options when it comes to, like, if a client's early stage, not a huge budget, they don't want to, they want to kind of just outsource a lot of this to their media partner or media planning team. What are some of those channels that provide very specific segmentation, NPI cross matching, diagnosis code, et cetera?
Yeah, the one that comes top of mind on that lens is programmatic, whether that be display banners, video, you can lean that into CTV, OLV, whatever it may be. But programmatic really leans into those capabilities to find those HCPs at even more of an efficient rate than your MPI targeting. You would think having your MPI list would make it more efficient, but it's actually more efficient to go out and find them and create these custom segments. So we work with plenty of partners and have different opportunities for different price points, different specialties that really hone in on those key, diagnostic codes or prescription codes, whatever it may be, to find those HCPs. But then on the flip side, MPI targeting, we can do so much with that and so much on the back end as well from a physician level data perspective and pass back and different learnings that we can take with us to the branded campaign. So the opportunities are almost endless when it comes to that. It's just finding that sweet spot of which works the best, which I think we've seen in our working relationship as well.
Well, what what about KOL engagement? What about influencers? And you mentioned a little bit of the social, but there's sort of this kind of muddy area that I think takes a lot of investment. It's some of our clients kind of feel, oh, that's reserved for the big guys, and it's high budget, and it's more sophisticated, and even the production costs with a lot of these different channels. But talk a little bit about reaching physicians in those uh, blocked off and exclusive social channels for physicians, and also how you engage with KOLs and those KOL influencers online.
Yeah, there are plenty of big names on the block, both on the endemic side, the professional social side. And like you said, a lot of times there's sticker shock in that element of it is more expensive. It's more expensive to pay to play, but the risk is almost always worth the reward, in our opinion, as you're really digging in and getting that trust and scientific credibility by aligning your upcoming brand with a key opinion leader who is well respected in the space. And you're also aligning with the brand of the advertising platform itself. So it's kind of a two birds with one stone element there. So we've seen different podcasts, video programs, custom content, articles, webinars, whatever it may be, that you can lean into KOLs here. And a lot of times you're able to work with these platforms to select your chosen KOL. So you can still kind of create that niche alignment with your specific specialty, specific disease state, especially in the rare disease space, to really hone in on that effort as well.
Nice. Very cool. Well, are there any specific costs? I know it's really hard. Once again, every answer in marketing starts with it depends. But you mentioned earlier the importance of paid search. I think from my perspective also the importance of like a high quality website that can be optimized well, especially with answer engines, and sort of combining that paid search with some quality websites, of course. But what are some other channels that are typically a little bit more accessible but also very effective on down the line from paid search? And I say that because like in my mind, I've seen you mentioned a lot of these NPI, or a lot of this targeting where you may not even need the NPI list. And from my perspective, I've seen a lot of that. I think a lot of clients might be surprised first off when thinking one of the first recommendations might be banner ads, or like banner ads. Still hear that with print too. Like, oh, you still do print ads? I mean, look, there's a place for all of this stuff. And you brought up one of the points. I mean, these banner ads, yeah, I mean, they seem like, yeah, you're not going to get a lot of clicks, but that's not just their point. It's the targeting, it's the consistency, it's the impressions, it's the messaging. And so kind of walk through some of those more affordable pieces and their benefits.
Yeah, I think, you hate to bring the caveat back right from the jump, but depending on what specialty you're looking at and the, depth and scale of it, medical journals have really proven to be a strong opportunity here, especially at that brand awareness level. You mentioned banners, but display banners across some of these top medical journals in each of the fields can really come in pretty efficient and range, from the low thousands up until like, low five-figure range. So there's opportunities to do so. And we've seen great success in some of our clients where KOLs are reaching out to their field teams and to the marketing execs at the manufacturer themselves and saying, hey, we saw your banner ad and we're providing that one-to-one connection. So while you said banner ads may be becoming this new, quote unquote boring or not sexy opportunity, if you will, they're still very credible and they still provide that, contextual alignment that you need at that lower cost. I would also say programmatic, again, you can go as big or as little as you want there. It just depends on the scale that you want to reach, the availability against your target segments you're looking at, as we talked about earlier. So there's really, you could go from 10% reach to your audience all the way up to 80, 90%, and that's just going to affect your costs. So there's definitely ways to, fit the pieces of your puzzle together while still staying within a specific budget.
I think one of those things that creatives like a little bit about some of these display buys too is that you are able to utilize the campaign pretty effectively. Even some of them have the animations, but you've got that consistency of messaging with sort of that ad lob across different channels. And so when you're referring to some of those journals, you're referring to kind of the online publications, but some of the surprising effective initiatives that we've seen is a lot of the wraps around kind of the direct mail of the actual print publications these days. I mean, those things go into the office, and even those we've seen can be NPI targeted. You don't need to necessarily send to the entire list. You can just send to specific segments of that list back to the segmenting. So I think a lot of clients are pleasantly surprised when they hear about some of the sophistication that's available behind the scenes with a lot of these different channels, whether it's print or display, et cetera, and even old-fashioned email list buys. You hear marketers all the time. Nobody opens emails. Nobody clicks on banners. But the combination of all of these, and you look at the ROI, and you're able to purchase or rent a good email list and have that subject header even for the people who don't open, and have your full message readable and clickable from those emails. I mean, there's just a lot of these different channels that that's why I think planning early, like you're saying earlier, Walt, early on. I mean, marketers don't have to spend money until they're convinced necessarily that the media plan is a good plan in a lot of cases, right? So I think there's no real negative apart from time, which can be a big net of bringing on media planning early and really figuring out the benefits and detriments and the different budgets and the negotiation levels that media partners might have early on. So we've talked a lot about a lot of great things for the unbranded. And you even mentioned, Nicole, a little bit about how the unbranded and that halo effect into branded. So that's a beautiful segue into our next topic, which we'll get to in our next podcast. But before that, before we record that with entirely new shirts, but same guests. What are some of the hints or the teases you can talk about quickly for a minute or so, just about how unbranded helps inform branded?
Yeah, there are so many learnings you can take with you, looking at the media metrics that come from your DSE, DSA channels, your, impression delivery for DSA, clicks, engagement, all the way through to your website activity, and seeing, are certain channels driving greater time on site? Are you clicking through to more pages on a website? You mentioned having a strong website. That plays a role too in understanding HCP behavior. So we definitely take all of those, look at optimizations on a monthly basis. And as you quickly approach that branded, coming soon to now approved phase, we're taking those learnings with us and adjusting our plans accordingly. So it's kind of an always on, full circle look at how we can continuously improve your campaign so it's never stagnant. And Walt, feel free to chime in with anything else you think.
No, absolutely. I think you nailed it really well. And part of that journey, part of those learnings, right, is working with your agency, your creative agency partner. And it also gives you the chance in the DSE phase to see which part of that creative is really landing, right? So we always do a couple different versions. And so if a disease state is about the side effect profile is better with a particular MOA, or is the efficacy better, and what are the outcomes, right? Some of those things they're there, obviously, without getting into the specific drug itself, but those things are great. So wow, that really resonates. It's really the side effect profile that's really bothering the patient population, because HCPs are dealing with that. And so maybe that is how you lean into the creative for the branded.
I love it. I think that's another pleasant surprise that some marketers experience when they realize that for unbranded campaigns, you don't just have the benefit, of course, getting that campaign out and reaching your audience and all those strategic positioning and messaging benefits, but then you also have the analytics, the measurable benefits that can inform it's almost like a version of market research that can inform your branded launch. So that's why I'm pretty excited about our next recording to follow this up. Well, thank you both for being guests today and bringing your experience on for our biotech and pharma marketers out there. And we thank you, all you viewers and listeners, for for tuning in for our HCP media planning for unbranded campaigns. Next, we will have the same for reaching HCPs via media planning on branded campaigns. So we look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye.